Okay, it is 7 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Okay, hello and welcome to another lifelong learning series sponsored by the Illinois College Alumni Association Board. My name is Taylor Smith, class of 2015, and I now have the pleasure of working here on the Hilltop in the Office of Development and Alumni Relations. Tonight we'll be highlighting a program that has been here on the Hilltop for over 20 years, the Volunteer Income Tax Program. We will have the pleasure of hearing from a current professor, a current student, and an alum from the class of 2015. I'm thrilled to introduce our wonderful presenters. John Rush is an associate professor of accounting here at IC. John received his bachelor's and master's of accountancy from Western Illinois University. His professional certifications include the CPA, CMA, CFM, and CFE. He has served as the chair of the business department for 10 years, and after being here as an educator for 24 years, this May, John will be retiring. We are so thankful for his dedication to the institution as well as his students. Our student presenter is sophomore Lauren Dombacher. She has plans to major in accounting with a possible minor in business administration. She has an interest in pursuing a career in tax accounting or auditing, and she plans on taking the CPA exam in the future. She has been helping with the program and was gracious enough to come on tonight's presentation. Lastly, but most certainly not least, is our 2015 alumni, Brielle Stinson. Brielle is currently working as a tax manager at Sickish. Some of her job duties include reviewing individual and business income tax returns, consulting with clients regarding various tax planning opportunities, and she helps develop staff through supervising and mentoring, as well as assisting partners and senior leaders with generating new business opportunities and building client relationships. Please stay on after the presentation is done for our open Q&A, where you will have the opportunity to ask our presenters questions about the VITA program. I will now hand it over to John.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. It's very odd just talking to a computer screen, even though we've done a lot of that in the last few years. Welcome to the program. I'm going to give you a little history on the program and where we got to where we are currently. And then I will pass it on to our other two presenters to share what they would like to share. So first of all, I need to give credit to Professor Jamali, who was here at Illinois College prior to me arriving on campus in 1998. And he had started this program prior to that time. We had a good working relationship with the Prairie Council on Aging, which is a social service agency in Jacksonville that helps the elderly. They are still in business and they still help the elderly quite a lot. He had arranged a group of students to help some of their clientele with their tax returns each year. It wasn't a very large program, and they were doing paper tax returns at that time. If any of you are my age, you certainly have experience with paper tax returns, but those that are younger may not. And they're a whole different ballgame from what we're used to in using software in today's world. Well, I took over the program sometime in the early 2000s. I'm not 100% sure of the date, around 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. And found that it was a little bit stressful to be working with taxpayers, sitting across a table, working with students that perhaps didn't have the best training in the world, and just a lot of stress involved. And of course, in a paper tax return, whenever an error is found, you get to go back and correct all the subtotals, and that changes almost every other number that's on the tax return. And so that could make it really difficult. It could take quite a while to complete what might be a relatively basic tax return. So after about 2 years in that fashion, I decided we have got to get this modernized. And so I was able to acquire 3 laptops. I was able to use funding from the accounting club here at Illinois College to do that. And that helped tremendously. Of course, as you know, anytime you try to learn a new skill using any type of technology, there are going to be glitches and there's going to be a learning curve. And so we certainly experience those things as well. We were located at City Hall in Jacksonville, and we were in the basement. And at that time, there was no internet connection there. So we had to use desktop software, which meant I needed to update the computers at least every week because tax software gets updated frequently as they find the bugs. And it's not an unusual thing because so much of our tax law doesn't even get passed until so late in the year. And I'm sure most of you are aware that last year they made some changes in March, in the middle of the filing season. And so there's always going to be updates. And of course, there are technical glitches as well. So we had to manually update those computers. And again, because we didn't have an electronic connection, an internet connection, I had to offload all the tax returns onto a flash drive, bring them to campus, and e-file them from here. And so it was a little bit cumbersome, but it was definitely worth it. One thing that I don't want to forget to mention is, of course, the college has a pretty good reputation for service learning, civic engagement, and that was part of the focus of this program from the start, is to give our students an opportunity to do something outside the classroom with their hands immersed in doing an activity like this. Benefit the community and benefit the students as well. And so it was really a good idea that was started. And we tended to just build the program over time. We did run into some issues. Some of you may recall that there were some rebates back in the Bush presidency years. And the way they structured those rebates were if you hadn't filed a tax return in the previous year, you did not get the rebate. That was a problem for some retired people because you get to a certain age, and if you're a lower income person, you may get to a place where you don't need to file a tax return any longer if you just have Social Security income as the majority of your income. So we had clients that were not terribly happy that we had told them, you don't need to file a tax return any longer, and then they didn't get the rebate. And so, of course, they had to create a little program to work around that situation. Well, as I said, we didn't have an internet connection. That was problematic. We were kind of in the basement. It wasn't very pretty in the city hall. And so eventually, I did work with Lincoln Land Community College, and we were able to move from City Hall to Lincoln Land Community College. They have quite a nice operation down on the square in Jacksonville. So it's only about a block from where the City Hall was, but it's much more visible and easy for people to get to. So moving into Lincoln Land was a really big plus for us. Plus, they had, Wi-Fi that we could connect to with our computers, and so that meant we could switch from using the desktop system and start using the online system. Well, somewhere in there, we switched from one software to another, and that, of course, was because the IRS decided to switch. We are not given a choice, but we do have a pretty full-service software package. We're currently using something called TaxSlayer, probably not heard of if you're not doing anything in taxes, but it's a pretty good sized commercial program that is used pretty extensively, and it's a pretty good program. Of course, when we switched, there was a huge learning curve again in figuring out, many times you know that something is not correct on the tax return, and you know what number should be showing in a certain location, but for the life of you, you cannot find a little box that you need to check to make sure that it actually does respond the way you need it to respond. And that can be a little bit frustrating, but it's even more frustrating when you're sitting face to face with clients and you look like you don't know what you're doing because you can't figure out how to make the software work. Most tax operations that are at the professional level in CPA firms, they don't tend to sit across the table from their clients. They tend to get packets of information and work on the tax returns and contact the client when they have questions. Well, of course, lower income community doesn't have as complicated a tax situations. And if you walk into H&R Block or Liberty Tax Service or somebody like that, they will be sitting there with the clients usually as well. And so we're somewhat similar to that type of an operation. But getting a little bit of pressure sometimes just makes it a little bit harder for you to even think straight and determine, oh gosh, what are we going to do? Well, of course, we were always able to resolve all of those issues, but sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable. Another big issue we had when we went to the online system is that providers of the software, I don't believe, had done a very good job of stress testing their system. And so the system would tend to go down when you have appointments scheduled every half hour and the system goes down for 45 minutes and you're sitting there talking to your clients as other people show up and are waiting in line. Well, that can get kind of stressful as well. But again, we'll give those tax software providers credit. They do work out their bugs. They do get things working better. And in our more recent years, we didn't have those problems any longer because they had gotten used to the stress, I guess, that was going to be on their system. Many, many good positives of using an online system because, of course, the computers will be updated automatically since we don't have to update the computers. We're just accessing the program through a secure browser. And that's very helpful. And when it comes to the electronic filing, again, it can all just be done from whichever computer an administrator is logged into. And of course, that would be me as the administrator. And so that meant that I would have to go in and review and approve every single tax return as they get electronically filed. Okay, so things generally have gone pretty well. When new things come into the tax code, such as the Affordable Care Act, which doesn't seem that new now, but it was new not that long ago. And that was a bit of a glitch because taxpayers didn't understand it Frankly, some tax preparers didn't understand it very well. And sometimes, again, there is a learning curve to figure out what's the best way to handle some of these things. And of course, when you're the frontline tax preparer and someone finds out that there is a penalty for not having health insurance and they didn't know that before, they're not very happy with us. And of course, all we're doing is telling them what the tax law says. And so you do have to get used to dealing with people that might get a little disgruntled once in a while. Honestly, I can tell you in all my years of experience, 90+% of the people were so gracious and so thankful and would just thank us multiple times for helping them. And so, yes, we had some bad eggs once in a while. It was such a minor issue compared to the gracious behavior of most of the clients that we deal with. It's very important to have this type of a program in an area like Jacksonville. We are a rural area. There are a lot of people in this community that do meet the low income requirements of the program, which right now the income requirements are about 60,000 for a tax return. And so that's, a lot of people would say, well, that's not very low income. And I would tend to agree, in a place like Jacksonville, 60,000 is a pretty decent income. But that's not necessarily the clients that we were usually dealing with. More often than not, we'd be dealing with people somewhere between $8,000 and $30,000 would be their income, and that might be a family of 3 or 4 people. And of course, we know there are other assistance programs out there that they may be taking advantage of, so on and so forth. But there just is a really big need. When I first got involved with this program, they were doing somewhere between 40 to 50 tax returns a year. We gradually built it up. Back in the original days, we were only doing 2 to 3 hours twice a week, and built the program up to where it was about 15 hours a week of time that we were preparing tax returns. And the last 2 years before we ran into the COVID situation, we had done over 600 tax returns. And so that's quite a few. And we felt really good about students are getting some experience on professional tax software. They're learning something about, being charged with an activity, and you need to figure this out and do it with a smile on your face and be nice to the taxpayers. And of course, as I said, most people are extremely gracious, but some do get upset now and then. And so we learn how to deal with those sorts of issues as well. People will come in and they have ideas, that one of their friends has told them something. Well, probably their friend had given them a piece of bad information, and they didn't fully understand what their friend was trying to tell them. And so they tried to explain to us, well, what do we do about such and such? And unfortunately, many times it was something that just did not even apply to their situation. And so we have a lot of misinformation, like those types of things to deal with people. And had a few people that got pretty upset. Probably one of the funniest issues were 2 men that came in one time. They had obviously been in the bar for an hour or 2 before they came in, because it did smell a bit like a brewery when they were in the room with us. They were very nice and likable, and they were very gracious, but you just never know what's going to walk through the door when you are working with the public at large. I think a lot of times we also forget that there are plenty of people who really don't have much experience with technology. There certainly are people not using a smartphone in today's world. And then there are plenty of people who use a smartphone, but that's the only piece of technology that they have ever used. And so they may know how to talk and text and maybe access social media, but they know nothing else. And so this sort of person is probably not going to be able to do a tax return on their own. And for me, it kind of breaks my heart when I see someone who's struggling along trying to live on, say, $20,000 of income, and they have to go to a pay service to get their tax return done. And as many of you know, services like H&R Block, and I am not saying anything bad about them. They provide a very good service for lots of people. But the idea of a $50 tax return usually doesn't exist because they tend to charge based upon the number of forms and the difficulty of the forms. Well, when you're using software and you're talking and working with lower income people, there isn't that much difficulty with any of the forms that are being used. But if a single person should happen to have had just one other type of income, that may cause them to have to do a different form, and that causes the fee to go up. If they have a child, that's another form that causes the fee to go up. And so before you know it, somebody with a $20,000 income is being charged $300, $350 for their tax return. And it probably only took the preparer 15 minutes to do the return. And so to me, that's just shameful. Again, I'm not saying anything bad about those tax services. They are filling a need. People need this assistance. But it really shows us that in most communities, there is a need for a free service like our volunteer program has been. And so I hope that we'll be able to continue to operate this program in the future. COVID hit us in 2020, and we had to cut the season short because here at Illinois College, we basically all went home in March, and we worked remotely the rest of that year. And so that lopped off several weeks of what we might have still done. Last year, of course, we were prior to a vaccine, and in order to protect all of our students, I felt it just wasn't something that we could operate in the way that we had done it in the past. And so what we chose to do was just a program here on the Illinois College campus where we would help students and help staff and maybe some family members. But what that did to our productivity is we went from 600 plus returns to about 100 last year. I expect that this year is going to be about the same because again, well, we're still battling the COVID situation. And I just don't think that it's a good idea for our students to mix with a lot of people in this community in the way that we used to handle face-to-face type activities. I hope we're able to do those sorts of things again in the future. Of course, I am going to retire, and so that will be up to someone else if they want to bring the program back to full strength in the future. I think at this time, I would like to just ask Brielle, what were your impressions? What would you like to add?
Yeah, so overall, I've really enjoyed being a part of the program. One of the big things that I gained through it was just getting a glimpse into what it's like to be a tax accountant. I really realized like through the program that I enjoyed doing this type of work. And I was able to get familiar with some of the different forms and the different questions and issues that can arise within the taxes. And then just another thing, it helped develop some like client relationship skills, sense of responsibility and confidence. It was cool to be a college student sitting across from the clients where they trust you to prepare the return and make sure it gets filed properly. And obviously there was checks and balances where Professor Rush would review it and answer any questions we had, but just that sense of responsibility that was gained through it was really cool. So overall, I thought it was a great like hands-on experience, just being able to get off campus, apply what we learned in the classroom to like a real life experience. So overall, I was really happy to be a part of the program.
Okay, thank you. And Lauren, you were able to take part in the program last year. Of course, last year was a year that was kind of a transitional year, as I didn't know how things were going to go, and it didn't turn out to be the best year. And we had to actually go from, we did one day of face-to-face, and I decided that that just wasn't going to work because people wanted to get too close to the people that were preparing their tax returns. And so we started doing a drop-off system at that point in time. And that worked a little bit better, but frankly, we just didn't have enough tax returns to do for all the students that I had involved. I guess I failed to mention this previously. Originally, the program was separate from our tax class. After 2 or 3 years, I embedded it in the tax class. That way I had plenty of people to participate in the program. And that just became a lot of what we did in that program. We have pulled it back out of the tax class now because it didn't work very well last year. And so, Lauren, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so last year I took it and it was in the middle of COVID, so I didn't get much of I got a lot of hands-on learning, but I didn't get much of that client relationship. But it still was I loved the class because I knew I was making a difference. I knew I was still helping the community in some way, and it was still beneficial. I had to learn all the documents. I wasn't very familiar with it, but through the hands-on, it really helped me learn because I'm such a hands-on learner. And I also only did about 4 or 5 real tax returns instead of the normal because we only had about 100 instead of the 600. But again, I still enjoyed it, and it is made after taking that class, I knew the difference I was making. So I am really tempted to take it, like further my career in tax accounting because of this class.
Thank you. Taylor, did you want to open things up for questions or?
Yeah, we absolutely can. So if you guys don't mind, I will start off with some and give our attendees some time to get their questions in the Q&A, or they can put them in the chat as well if they'd like to. So my first question is for Lauren. What was one of the biggest challenges that you faced when starting this program?
One of the biggest challenges I think I faced was just not having that client relationship, because I was only with, as Professor Rush said, we only were with the client for one day, and we only did one, and then the rest we got the documents and then we just went through it and did it ourselves. So the biggest challenge is, like, if we had questions about like theirs specifically, we couldn't ask them. We had to go through Professor Rush to ask them, and so that was probably one of our biggest challenges for me.
Yeah, this communication can really be lacking. I could see how that would have affected you guys in the past couple of years with doing the program with COVID. Bree L, what has been your biggest takeaway from being a student that participated in this program, and how do you apply it today in your job?
Yeah, so kind of like I said, just like the client relationship, just being able to communicate with the clients and ask them the questions. I see what Lauren was saying, how it would be really difficult when you're not able to easily access them to ask them those questions. But that's been one of the things that I've applied from this program to my career now.
Okay. All right, we have one. This is for John. How will you choose students who participate this year? Will they get extra credit?
Hey, that's a good question. That we actually do have the volunteer tax program listed in the class schedule as a 2-credit class, and it's open to anyone who would like to sign up. So yes, they do earn credit, They will still have to, I didn't talk about the training, but there is a training and there's a certification test involved where everyone has to be certified before they are allowed to do the tax returns. And it's a pretty thorough test. In fact, I was just working the first part of it today myself because I have to be certified too. And so I was doing some practice tax returns, so on and so forth. And so even in that process, you do get to learn quite a lot. But yes, this year, instead of being a part of the tax class, it will be a standalone program. And I only have 4 students signed up right now, but that may be just about right. If we only have 100 tax returns, they will get quite a lot of practice.
Okay, yeah, I have one for you as well. What will you miss the most after retiring with working with your students in this program?
Well, I certainly will miss working with the students because the way our program would work previously, sometimes we'd be swamped and we'd be so busy and it would be very hectic as there are 4 stations of students doing tax returns and they all have questions for me at the same time. And so I'd be running from station to station. But the way things would typically work, there would be times when we would get caught up and even get ahead, and then we'd have an opportunity to just kind of talk about life and whatnot. And so, a lot of out of the classroom type interactions that we things are not the same right now at the college with the COVID situation. And I don't want to make too big of a deal about this, but I have students that I have now had in 4 classes, and if I saw them walking down the street without a mask, I probably would not know who they are. And that is really sad to me. And actually, it's kind of funny. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I went over to Milliken when IC was playing Milliken because we have some friends that have a son that play on Milliken's team. Anyway, one of our IC students who is an accounting major was there, and I saw her and I thought, well, that kind of looks like so-and-so, but she didn't have her mask on and I wasn't sure. And I probably would have known if she had her mask on.
Yeah, you get used to just seeing everything eyes and above. So I can understand that. Lauren, was it difficult to prepare for that test that Professor Resch was referring to?
It was not as bad as he makes it seem. We went over a lot of studying in class before we even took it, and we did a lot of practice questions, so it wasn't that bad.
Good. Brielle, is there, with your coworkers, and I know that you work from home, but being part of this program, do you think that it kind of helped set you above the rest of those that are in your same job?
Yeah, certainly as I first started out as a staff accountant, it helped. I kind of was a little bit more familiar with the forms and such. When I started out, they kind of just throw you into it and do your best to prepare this, and then they'll help you along as you go. But so it was kind of nice to be familiar with the forms and some of the different questions and issues that can arise.
I could definitely understand that. And if anyone else has any other questions they'd like to put in, I have another one for Brielle. Did you have a challenging return during your time with the program? And if so, will you share what it was?
I don't really recall. I mean, it was over 7 years ago probably now. So I don't really recall any specifically challenging ones. I know as Professor Resch was saying, there would be times where we would have questions and then somebody else might be asking him a question. So it would be kind of a little bit awkward when the client's sitting there right across from you and you're just okay, I just got to wait here until I can get the question answered. But that's really the only thing I can remember being challenging.
Okay. All right, last chance for questions. If anyone else has any more, go ahead and type those in there. So Lauren, I know you're only a sophomore, but you kind of gave me a little bit of what you're planning on doing. But is there anything else that you have kind of thought about through working with Professor Resch? Or is there anything that he's encouraged you to go into?
Well, he's a CPA as well, and I've also always been interested in that, and I've taken many of his other classes, And he always talks about like the CPA exam, what you can expect of how these examples that we're doing in class could be expected in the CPA exam. And so I've always found that very helpful as well.
Okay. And again, last chance for questions. Go ahead and drop those in there. John, what's something you hope students gain from this program, whether it be the biggest thing or something very small?
Well, I guess it's probably a combination of things because, of course, here at the college, we do like people to think about being civically engaged. And so, this is something that it does count as civic engagement that all students are required to have while they're here. And I think it's a very productive civic engagement in that, again, not saying anything bad about any other program, but here we're actually helping people in the community who need the help and are very appreciative of the service we are providing. And at the meantime, students in accounting are at least getting some experience with a professional level software and something that, may or may not relate to their career because not everybody will work in taxation, but a lot of people will. And so it should be helpful.
Okay. All right, we have another question. John, how many students have you taught that have gone on to doing professional tax returns?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something that's pretty hard to quantify. Well, let's see, we've got Brielle here. So there's one. Actually, I know that there are quite a few, but honestly, I'm not certain. I would guess that there's probably been at least, 40 or 50 that have at some level they've been involved. Keeping in mind, if you're at a very large CPA firm, then you probably get specialized in audit or advisory services or perhaps tax. But if you're at a smaller CPA firm, they tend to do different things during different seasons of the year. And so most of those people would certainly be immersed in tax work during the spring. And so we have had a variety of people that go to those types of places as well. But as most people know, there are plenty of other career opportunities in accounting and finance that are not in taxation. And so many people go a different direction completely.
Okay. All right, well, that is all the questions that I have. We do have someone that wants to thank you all for offering this program to IC and to the community. And I definitely want to extend that to you as well, and just offering up your time for us tonight. But for those of you that joined us, we greatly appreciate you coming on. If you have any questions, please feel free to send those to me and I can send those on to our three lovely panelists. But we will go ahead and end the night here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.